People think brand is the logo. Oh, it's the farthest thing from what branding is. It's really about engaging the message to who you are and what you do. And I think some of the big players have done that very well. The ESPNs of the world, the Yahoos of the world, they've got great branding behind because they have messaged it properly. Some of these smaller companies who are trying to enter the space, I think they miss the mark sometimes. And it's just a messaging thing. And some of the newer entries have done a great job of it. So a lot of it is fan engagement. And then the biggest thing is trust. You've got to build trust in your brand. And what that means, you've got to perform. So for an example, if you've got a platform, a fantasy sports platform, and it's not operating the way you want it to, and people will just disengage, you've lost the trust. As you know, you have a very short window of building brand trust. And that's true in any industry. Sports, it's out there because it's such a high profile thing. I mean, you think about some of the most iconic sports brands out there. You know, in my day, I thought of Nike. Think about Nike and some of the things that they did. And that swoosh, just do it. And frankly, it was the just do it, the messaging that resonated. And yet they performed. And there's all kinds of stories like that. Tell a story, build your brand, and your consumer trusts you.
Welcome to today's Heart of the Hustle. I'm here with one of my oldest and dearest friends, Scott Hoyt, who is here to talk about his new business. And so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Cher. It's great to be here. Yeah. Great to see you after all those years.
I know. It's crazy. We've known each other 30 years.
Let's not try to think about that too much. But yes, you're right. You're right. And we're still talking to each other, which is a great thing.
You were my first marketing boss. Like, you were my first marketing coach.
And see where it has led you today.
I know.
And you know this. I've sent messages to you periodically how proud I was to watch this develop. Because it's very cool. It's very cool.
Thank you.
Because you were a young whippersnapper back then.
Yeah.
Who really had a lot of energy. And you turned that energy into this.
Oh, thank you. Tell us about your new business.
So fantasy sports strategy was really kind of created 36 years ago. And let me give you the backstory behind that. So in 1989, August of 1989 to be exact, I got an invite from a bunch of media guys in Seattle, Washington. But we did a bunch of advertising with them, and they said, hey, we're going to create this thing called fantasy football. We're going to create a league. You want to join? And I thought, innocently, I thought, yeah, because I grew up in sports. My family was all in sports. I was a sports fanatic even then. I said, sure, why not? Might as well. And what I didn't know then that I now know is that turned into really a 36-year love affair with fantasy sports. It elevated my level of interest in sports to something that I've never experienced before. And if you try to couple that with trying to grow your career as a marketing person and a branding person, kind of sometimes would be difficult to do it. So it really started 36 years ago. And it wasn't until about 2.5 years ago where I realized that this was my calling. I'd retired about 4 or 5 years ago. It's okay. I don't want to sit around just doing nothing. Let's get my brain working. And what do I love to do the most? Which is sports, fantasy sports. So what I've done is I've created this little small business, and really the most and probably the biggest part of it is to help small businesses, startups, which is what I am. And I'm able to take my 40 plus years of marketing and branding and help companies who need that kind of extra step to get them to be sustainable in an industry that is multi-billion dollars.
So how many startups are starting in the fantasy sports? Because there's a couple big ones, right? But then is there room for a lot of these startups? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the ecosystem is very large.
Yeah.
So when you say there's a couple of big ones, there's several big ones. Yeah. And they're the ones that have really grown this industry to where it is today. However, drive organic growth in this industry, you need some of these smaller entrepreneurs who've got great ideas, who want to build this technology, and they want to take it to the next step. And that could be a B2C, a B2B. They could be a platform creator. They could be a content creator. But there's a lot of people, if you think about all the people who have played fantasy sports, It's been born out of that. And so to answer your question, there are a ton of small enterprises out there who are trying to take it to market. And I would tell you, I mean, I know several of them now. And to give you a good example, there was a company that's very, very well known today called Price Picks. 5 years ago, they were a startup, and look where they are today. They are, they just got they did a big acquisition. They're one of the big guys. And so they were 5 years, that was 5 years ago. So it's an industry that is thrilled to have innovation because it's an industry that basically grew based on innovation and technology. So there's a lot of room for everybody.
What's the profile of the founders of these kind of companies? Are they former athletes? Are they current athletes? Is it something that influencers are starting? Is it more technology folks? Or is it people who just love fantasy sports? Is there kind of a common thread?
I think all of the above.
Okay.
I think if you look at the profile, there's a lot of these people who've been in the sports industry in some form or fashion for years who wanted to expand upon that. There are startups that are technology people who have built a software program. There's, now that gambling's legal in a lot of states, that has become another area that is booming. And so there's those type of people who love to do that, and they bring these things to market. So the profile's all over the place, all the things that you just mentioned. But what you see currently right now, you see a lot of people who have been in this community for years. And I say that with a large degree of compliment is the fantasy sports industry is a very well-connected small community that's, billion of dollars. And yet it's a small community. And when you go to any of the conferences where these people are, you play where they play, you will feel it. You feel it instantly. I've been to several of them. I'm part of the FSGA, and we can talk about that here in a second. And it's a community, and these people thrive in this community because it's a love of the game, love of sports. There's the common denominator. There's one other aspect that I think is important to note here, and it's growing, the demographic profile of women getting involved in fantasy sports. Yeah. It is one of the fastest growing demographic profiles. There's a couple startups out there that I'm very familiar with that have got great ideas or are becoming a market soon. I was at a conference and they were doing panel discussions, breakout panel discussions. The largest one of the day, the most attended, was a women in fantasy sports panel, most well attended by anybody.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it is.
And so is it women's sports that they're creating fantasy teams for, or women who are playing, or both?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at the WNBA and the popularity of the WNBA, that has spurred a new demographic profile of women in sports. You extend that to women playing fantasy sports. So now it's football, it's baseball. They all it's basketball. They're playing fantasy sports with the men, and it's great. My daughter plays. My wife plays. My daughter's friends play. We have a family league that half of us men, half of us are women. And frankly, they've kicked our ass a couple times.
I was going to say, what's your standing in the family league?
Yeah.
Do we want to know?
So, if they were all here, they'd probably tell you. But that league's been in now 9 years strong. And we call it the Friends and Family League. And I'm the commissioner of this league, and I've never won the league. The first year, my wife won it. The third year, my daughter won it. My name is not on the trophy yet. And believe me, I get reminded of that all the time.
Maybe this year. This is your year.
Yeah, maybe.
This is your year.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us more about, you told us about an organization that you spend a lot of time in.
FSGA, which stands for Fantasy Sports Gaming Association. So this is an association, nonprofit, that has been around for many, many years. And it's like any association, they're there to support the growth of the industry and to help the industry grow on areas that you wouldn't be able to grow normally. It's a big networking community. They fight regulation, some of the regulation that's out there. They support startups, but they're also there with the big guys, and they're all playing. And they get together twice a year. We have two conferences, a winter conference and a summer conference. I just came back from one in Chicago. And I sit on two of their advisory committees. I sit on the PR advisory committee and the membership committee. And so it was really through that association that I really created this new company because I saw avoid. I saw some of these entrepreneurs that had this great idea, but they were missing some elements of going to market, whether it be overall strategy, branding, communications, technology, and they really don't have the financial wherewithal to go grab a big consulting firm and pay thousands of dollars. So they're looking for somebody or something to help them kind of get them over, no pun intended, over the goal line.
Right.
And so that's how I created it. And it was really designed with that in mind. It was through my association with the FSGA. And they're a prominent place in my website because they were instrumental in me taking that next step.
And you hosted their podcast at the last event,
I
right?
did. Yes, in fact, because I'm on the PR committee. I do some of the podcasts. I'm the interviewer. I'm sitting in your chair actually, and I interviewed a guy by the name of Scott Fish, who is iconic in the fantasy sports world. And the reason I say that is he has this big event that he does every year in the fantasy football space. Everybody knows him. They know his event. They all go to it. He does them in 17 different cities, does it online. And when he walks in the room, and I said this to him, it's like Elvis has walked in the room. It's like, oh my gosh, Scott Fish is here. And so, yeah, I was privileged to be able to do that interview. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Because I could talk football for hours. You and I want to talk football, but we could do this for another couple hours if you'd like.
I'm useless when it comes to football. I let my husband and my son have those conversations, or he does with his daughter. I make chili.
Yeah.
For the football game.
That's okay. That's a needed piece of what we do.
That's my contribution.
Yeah, and it's funny because fantasy sports has evolved so much over the years. When I talked about 1989, when I got started, so this was a league that you would set your lineup, and we'd have to fax it in. You had to have it in by 6 p.m. Friday night. Now, keep in mind, games don't start until Sunday back then. So you couldn't make any changes. And then come Monday, we would all go to the USA Today, the actual paper, look at the performance of our players, and literally have to write down how many points we think our player scored. And then the commissioner would send out a report saying, well, you scored 82 points. And we'd go, oh, no, you missed this because this guy did this, and go look at it in the newspaper. And so there were corrections for several days because it was all manual. You would have these draft parties where you go to do your draft for your players, and it was on a flip chart. You'd write it down in a flip chart. So I say this because what has evolved today is all technology-based innovation out there, that it is real-time drafts. It is real-time performance. As a game is going on today, on Sunday, your player who's on the field just scores a touchdown, you will go on the platform that you're using, and there's a lot of them, and you will see that score posted immediately. So the technology has just revolutionized this industry, and I think, frankly, responsible for the growth that we've seen.
What are some of the key differentiators between all these different platforms?
Yeah, so I think it's like any platform, some have different ways of doing it, ways to set a lineup, ways to pick up players, way to trade players. For the most part, they're pretty similar in style, but again, it's their branding. So they do it based on what their branding is. And I always like it to a new website. I want to make it easy to navigate, easy to understand, easy to find things. And so there are a handful of platform providers, and they're the common ones: ESPN, Yahoo, CBS Sports, Sleeper's a new entry into that. It's really good. They all have their own thing, yet they're all very, very well done and very well managed.
What's the role of online gambling with that? I worked in the online gaming space a million years ago in the 2000s, before it was legal. In the United States,
Probably had a bookie, didn't you?
Yeah, no, we were outside. We were outside of the United States when we were doing this. But what's the role of that? Because it's legal in some places, but not in others. And is that integrated in with these apps, or is it a separate?
It's a separate. I mean, so there are betting apps out there.
Okay.
Caesars, MGM. There's a lot of these places who are advocating and where you can bet online, and you can go on and bet on the games. You can bet on player performance. You can do all kinds of online gambling. And that has also revolutionized, I think, the fantasy sports world. fantasy sports has been long considered a game of skill. Gambling online is gambling. It's a
The house always wins.
game of luck. And even state regulators, why you don't have gambling in some of these states, and in some cases, not even being able to play fantasy sports, is because they view that as gambling. They don't want to have gambling in their sites for whatever political reasons or regulatory reasons they choose to do that. And so it's not in all 50 states today. I think that's one of the keys that we want to do. The state of California recently came out with some, basically telling FanDuel and DraftKings, stop. Because what they were doing was illegal in their state. And so there's some of that back and forth that goes on. But I think for the most part, it's another way for people to get engaged with the sport. In sports, it's not football, although the football, NFL and college football are a lion's share of fantasy sports. But there are basketball, there's baseball, there's golf, there's you name it. There's actually horse racing now. There's a horse racing app out there. It's crazy. It is. I talked to one of the founders the other day, and it's great. And so, if you can find a sport, more than likely it's some sort of fantasy application attached to it. But gambling's crazy, and I think it's allowed the pool of people to get involved to expand that much more. So, and FSGA is now Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association, and the gaming part is really the gambling part of that. So,
yeah,
the big players are all there.
Interesting.
FanDuel, DraftKings, MGM, Caesars, they're all there.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
What are some of the trends you see that are happening in this space right now that anybody who wants to enter the market needs to be thinking about?
Yeah, so you see a lot, especially in the gambling side of it. You see a lot of opportunities to do various type of bets. For example, player props seems to be a pretty popular, type of gamble, type of bet that you make. Player prop simply is, I'm betting that you as a player Vegas sets or whoever they set, this player will do 50 yards rushing today. You as a gambler could say, well, I'm going to place a bet that he's going to go over that. It's a player prop. You can put three together. So there's a lot of that type of activity that's out there. There's a lot of parlay betting, a lot of player prop betting. And so I think it's accessibility to all the information that is really the trend has changed that, and being able to do it online and to be able to do it from your house or from wherever you are. And it's real. It's fascinating. So the engagement is phenomenal. That being said, there's also an element of you got to be careful, like anything with gambling. And they will tell you that, you do have the addiction part of gambling that you do need to be mindful of. And that does exist. I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it does.
Tell us more about the branding side of, how these platforms get ahead. Because I know that's what you do, what you've always done.
Yeah. So, it's, and that's part of why I've started this little business that I did, is that I think there's great opportunities for you to brand. And people think of brand as, it's a logo. Oh, it's the farthest thing from what branding is. It's really about engaging the message to who you are and what you do. And I think some of the big players have done that very well. The ESPNs of the world, the Yahoos of the world, they've got great branding behind because they have messaged it properly. Some of the smaller companies who are trying to enter the space, I think they miss the mark sometimes. And it's just a messaging thing. And some of the newer entries have done a great job of this. So a lot of it is fan engagement and what is that message? And then the biggest thing is trust. You've got to build trust in your brand. And what that means, you got to perform. So for an example, if you've got a platform, a fantasy sports platform, and it's not operating the way you want it to, and people will just disengage, you've lost the trust. And you have, as you know, you have a very short window of building brand trust. And that's true in any industry. Sports, it's out there because it's such a high profile thing. I mean, you think about some of the most iconic sports brands out there. Who do you think of? Well, in my day, I thought of Nike. Think about Nike and some of the things that they did, and that swoosh, just do it. And frankly, it was the just do it, the messaging that resonated, and yet they performed. And then there's all kinds of stories like that. Tell a story, build your brand, and that your consumer trusts you.
And make sure that it's differentiated, right? Make sure that you're not just trying to be the same as everybody else, because you have to have something that's a little bit different. It's something that I see with the startup, business owners that I work with, they want to be everything to everybody, and they don't want to take a stand. And they don't want to be, bright pink or whatever it is, because they want to be super generic because they don't want anybody not to like them because they might walk away from revenue. And I'm like, it's exactly the opposite. You have to stand out and be willing to stand for something and have some differentiation.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and I think that's probably a point that I missed here, and that is be yourself. Be unique, because you're in an industry with a lot of noise, and differentiate yourself, but don't differentiate to think that what people want you to be who you want to be, and be unique, and then tell that story. So it's an important element of that step of branding that I think sometimes people miss.
Tell us more about your background and what you've done in the marketing branding world.
Well, I think most of this story. But
I know most of it, but our listeners don't.
I'll share this with you. I always tell people that my career was really divided into three areas. The first one was I spent almost 10 years in a typical B2C powerhouse brand called Proctor and Gamble. And that's where I learned the discipline of marketing. People always say, if you go to school, they'll tell you about the 4 Ps. Well, P&G will tell you there's 5. And I've always lived by that. And so I spent really the first part of my career learning marketing and branding from, I think, one of the best brand companies out there ever. And I then went from there, came here to Dallas, Texas, and worked for Southwood Corporation and ran marketing and brand for them for several years. And so that first part of my career was really with iconic brands that taught me the discipline of marketing and good branding. And I took those years of experience and got a phone call into a technology company. And it was a cellular company out of Seattle, Washington. And I'll never forget the story, because they said, the recruiter called me. They really want to talk to you because of your background, because of the Southland and P&G background. And I said, I don't think I'm the right person, because I'm not even sure I could spell the word cellular, let alone tell you what it does. And he said, that's exactly what they want. They want somebody with a different set of eyes that can come and bring the discipline of building a brand and marketing. So, the second part of my career was really spent in the crazy, what I call wireless days, which was everything from cellular to paging, back to cellular, and it was crazy. But I always tell people it was the most fun I had, working 70 hours a week doing it, and watching. You talk about explosive growth. It was massive, and you're talking about products that were innovative and so, yeah, I spent a lot of time with some great brands there. I went from McCaw Cellular, who ultimately were bought by AT&T. And then, I did that for another 10 to 12 years. And then the third part of my career, as I talk about, is I'd done everything that I wanted to do, that built my career successfully, I thought. Now I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And I found a global nonprofit that I went to work for them, and it's called the Internet Society. And that was the most rewarding of all my stops, because it was truly spreading internet to places around the world that didn't have it. And that was really our MO. So I spent, my last half of my career doing that. And I retired at, a somewhat younger age, but I retired I always tell people I retired as a marketing and brand guy, and that's all I got. But I did it everywhere I went. So that's what I always did.
And we met working at a paging company.
We did.
We were talking before the show with one of my studio assistants who has never seen a pager. It made both of us feel old. Yeah,
and it's a dynamic industry, because as I told her, I said, you're not going to believe how popular paging was back in the 90s. And in fact, one of the biggest paging companies resided here in Dallas, Texas, called PageNet. Very successful as part of that. But it was an industry that also, as fast as they grew, they were just as fast to collapse.
Yeah.
Not by their own doing, for the most part. It was really the doing of smartphone technology and broadband technology that made paging somewhat obsolete. And that's that's to be expected. And paging could not grow the same way that cellular companies and wireless companies could back then. So
Yeah.
but it's fun. We had a great time.
It's a great example of one of those dead industries that at the time it was ginormous, right? I remember we went to the huge trade shows and we were the center of all of it. And then 5 years later, it was all gone.
Yeah, and I remember one of the stories that I remember the most is that so when paging was starting to gain tremendous popularity, what was the next step for paging? And it was they called it two-way paging, where you could respond to somebody, but you needed airwaves to do that. And the FCC had carved out these airwaves, and they set an auction. FCC set an auction. So all these big companies, we went to Washington, D.C. I attended the very first FCC airwave auction, and our board gave us $200 million budget to spend, and we were able to buy 3 sets of airwaves to build this two-way paging. And we came back, and we were so proud of ourselves that we saved the board $2 million because we only spent 198 of that $200 million. But to this day, that never got off the ground because the broadband companies had realized that they could do that same type of messaging off of their network on a that ultimately became smartphones technology. And so that was really the start of the downfall of the paging industry as we knew it back then.
I remember I had a two-way pager when we worked together, and it was like revolutionary. People were like, "What is that?" In the grocery store, they'd be like, "What is that?" Because you'd be texting. And I got in what I believe to be one of the first texting accidents. I was texting on the highway and I rolled right underneath the car in front of me. And now it's a very common thing. But I was like, "Yeah, but did you do it in 97?
And I always tell people the stories about, do you remember the BlackBerry?
Right.
Does anybody remember the BlackBerry? Do you remember a thing called alpha paging? It's like, and you get blank stares. But we lived that. We lived every bit of that. And it was fun. And we were probably spending money that we didn't need to be spending.
Right.
You talk about all these conferences that we attended. Because at the time, it was a growing industry. And so, that was our MO, and that's what we did.
I went from that to the .com
Oh, no.
boom. And so, right, I was in Phoenix and paging and then got recruited to Austin and did the whole, that was talk about spending a lot of money you didn't need to spend and raising a bunch of money that you had no business raising. And that was a whole.
Well, I mean, the part that I failed to mention to you in my career is that I left the wireless industry because I got recruited. I was living in Phoenix at the time, got recruited out of this firm out of New York. 2 investment bankers had this idea that they were going to build an ISP in rural markets. Mm-hmm. And so to compete against AOL and Microsoft, who were handing out, remember those little discs that you'd hand out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they were going to do it in the rural market. So they weren't going to be competing. And so I said, well, it's a startup. It's a complete startup. I was employee number 4. And we went to market with it. In 18 months, we built a $180 million business that ultimately got sold to Earthlink.
Yeah.
But that was the .com crazy days. And there was acquisitions right and left. There was VC money flying outdoors. And it was built on what I just call building on the come. You would hope that you build it and customers will come. And they did, and then they didn't. And so,
do you see any of that in the fantasy sports world? In other words, are a lot of these companies, are they VC funded? Are they private funded? How are they starting?
All of the above again.
Yeah.
But a lot of them get started with angel money.
Okay.
You know, they have an idea. They go to their friends they know, and they create an angel pool of money. And then once they can build momentum through their angel money, that's when you start to see other investors, the VC, the private equity folks starting to come into play. And yeah, and some of these people actually attend these conferences that I just talked about, the FSGA, because they're looking for companies to invest in as well. They want to hear those stories. We, at the FSGA, we sponsor, at every conference we do an elevator pitch competition. You have literally 3 minutes to tell your story. And
that's a long time. I mean,
I don't know. It takes me 3 minutes just to get out 3 sentences. But and I've seen these now twice, and they're great. Actually, Price Picks, the company that I talked about, they were a winner 5 years ago, and look at them today. But I think what happens is you have 3 minutes to tell your story. And at the 3 minutes, they cut your mic off. It was kind of like the old Gong. Remember the old Gong show?
Yeah.
And but these are entrepreneurs that are up there telling that story. And who's in the audience are the people who are most interested in hearing what you have to say. And it's a really cool idea, and it allows entrepreneurs to really, hey, here's your 3 minutes of fame. Get up there and tell the best story you can. And it's worked very well. So it's kind of cool.
I do a lot of networking meetings, and you got 30 seconds. They're dinging something at the end of that 30 seconds. So I work with a lot of people on like, okay, let's get your 30-second pitch down, right? Because that's all you have. If you can't nail it in 30 seconds, you've lost the opportunity. And so how do we do that? I actually worked with somebody yesterday. That's all we did for 90 minutes was just 30-second pitch. Like just get it nailed down so that it rolls right off your tongue because that's all you got.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And that 30-second rule is a pretty common thing where if you can do a 30-second elevator pitch on who are you? And that all came when you walk in an elevator and somebody says, what do? You got 30 seconds because you don't have much time to tell that story. And if you can tell that story succinctly and directly in that 30 seconds, then you've done well.
Yeah.
It's hard to do. I have tried it. I fail every time. And I'm about to do it with my new company. And my PR guy, and he's a great guy, and says, you got 30 seconds. I said, can I have a minute? And then I go, well, can I have a minute 20?
No, you may not.
No, you may. I know I may not, but it's hard to do. It's hard to do because there's so much. I'm a storyteller. I like to tell stories. And I think part of a brand element is that storytelling and to be able to set that up. Sometimes people don't want to listen and they won't listen through. You probably lose them at about 35 seconds or so. And maybe more than that. I don't know. So
Even sooner.
I know.
Even sooner.
Especially in today's instant information.
Well, over time, I think the amount of time we're willing to pay attention gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And so the storytelling is still important. But
I love your brand, by the way. It's really great branding.
Yay, Natalia. I think that storytelling still has a role in marketing, but it's further down the funnel now because people aren't as willing to hear the story of the brand as they used to be, right? They wanted to understand that. Now it's like, what can you do for me? And then, okay, I'll pay attention a little bit more now and tell me why. Tell me the story.
Yeah, there are so many, as you know, there are so many trends in marketing that are garnering a whole lot of attention. And all I got to do is say 2 letters and everyone's head's going to spin. That's AI. And that is, if you're not keenly aware of the impact of AI and how that works and how it impacts your audience, you're already behind the game. And that's very true in fantasy sports. You're seeing a lot of companies start to really engage. You talked about earlier about trends. AI is a big trend, and people are just starting to figure out how to use AI in a fantasy sports world.
So what advice would you give to someone who wants to start one of these fantasy sports businesses?
Don't do it as I'm doing it now. You know what? Here's what I tell everybody who wants to do this. Be yourself. You have to break through the clutter. The way you be unique is be yourself and be diligent about how you present yourself to your audience. And that's whether it's, again, a B2B or a B2C. It goes back to the branding 101. Remember I told you that P&G had, 5 Ps? Well, everyone knows the 4 Ps, but the 5th P is really that positioning. And they've always been big believers is how do you position your brand, yourself to your consumer? And that is really all about messaging and how you tell that story. And so that's why I tell people is just be yourself, but do it in a way that you can be somewhat unique and break through the clutter.
And it's hard. It's hard. I think it's hard for founders to be themselves
Oh.
and to be able to, and I have this conversation every day. I mean, my business is built on it. How do you show up in a way that you don't feel like you're selling out, that's still interesting and intriguing and different, but, where you don't feel like you have to be a Kardashian or on stage all the time. There's so many nuances to being yourself. It sounds very simple. Actually is often the hardest thing. In many ways, I think it would be easier easier to, throw $10 million at the big ad agency and say, make me a really cool brand, but no one can afford that. Right. And so there's so many nuances to that.
Yeah. And again, I think you and I talked about this earlier is if you can be yourself and be comfortable being yourself, it's going to show through. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I'm sitting here and I got to tell this story. Sherry knows the stories, but I'll tell your audience. I'm sitting here in a hoodie and people who know me, he's always in a hoodie. He's always in a hoodie. But that's who I am. But that's who I've become. I'm not going to be in a suit. I'm certainly not going to be in a sport coat for most of the time, unless I have to. This is who I am. And I'm not going to apologize for that. This is who I am. And that's what I say to people is be yourself. Because people will read very quickly if you aren't. And that's where the trust comes in building a brand. And you ask the question is, what other advice would I give these startups in the fantasy sports world? I would tell them to hire me.
I queued you up for that one. Took you this long to get there.
I know, I didn't take the bait, did I? Yeah, but I got there eventually.
On that, tell us the services that you offer.
Yeah, so we are, we're a very nimble group. There's 3 of us, and we all have subject matter expertise. As the founder, I am taking on the business strategy, which includes the marketing and the branding. I've got another guy, Nick Phillips, who is the son of Tom Phillips, who is also my PR guy who I've known for many years. Nick is my head of digital content. He's a wizard with developing my website, and he's going to do editing by some of my videos that I have. And then I've got Tom Phillips, who I've known since 1989 from Seattle, and I hired Tom and his partner as my PR firm when I had a crisis, and he bailed me out of that crisis for my company. And so his subject matter expert is really PR and comms and crisis management. And Nick is really all about digital content and some of the things around that. And Nick is, in that space where he knows some of the great trends that are happening in the digital world as you do. And so that what we do is we offer these services, and you can cherry pick as a new company. Yeah, I don't really need comms, but I need digital content. I really don't need that, but can you help me with my brand? What should I say? How should I show up? We'll provide those services. But I got to tell you, it's really twofold here. It is, I want to help small companies, and our niche is going to be after the small companies. We're never going to be, nor do I want to be a big consulting firm. In fact, I kind of despise the word consulting to some degree. I really want to be an advisor to help them. My goal is twofold: to help them grow their business to be able to sustain it. That's number one. But number two, and maybe more importantly, is I want to grow the industry. And I feel an obligation to contribute to this industry. And for me to help small companies build and grow organically in this industry, that's contributing to that industry. So it's simple. It's a simple model. And again, this is just a passion of mine, a love of mine. This isn't something that, oh my gosh, I need to go out and make all this money. Because that's not what this is about. People know that it's just a love for what I do. And a love for really the subject matter.
And that's what makes it so fun. When you get to do what you love to do and make some money at it, there's nothing better.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I didn't come from the sports industry. Mm-mm. None of it. Don't have any of that experience. The only experience I have in the sports industry is that I was, some of my companies were big sponsors. We're big sponsors of some of these big sports agencies out there. But I always had a love for the game of sports. I've played sports and knew sports my entire life. So I always knew that there was always that interest in the back of my head. So I have to build trust. I have to build trust in my audience that these people who've been in this industry for 20 and 30 years are going to trust what I can do and what I can say. And so I've got to basically do what I professing other people to do. And so I got to show up as unique as I possibly can be myself. So I got to build it. It's going to take time.
That's okay.
Yeah.
This is a good first step.
It is.
Thanks for being on the show.
I love being on your show. You'll invite me back again, won't you, sometime?
Of course. Anytime. Yeah. Anytime.
Thank you, Sherry. It was great seeing you again, too.